Okay, this is going to be a short one. We're going to watch in class, obviously, this Marx reading. It's another excerpt from Marx. This is, again, the young Marx. Remember, I made the distinction between the later scientific Marx, which we're not reading. That's the Marx of Capital, volumes 1, 2, and 3. And then the younger Marx, the humanist Marx. This is, again, young Marx. This is written 1845. So this is before the big kind of tumultuous 1848 revolutions in Germany and really throughout Europe. This stuff is actually interesting, this older writing, the stuff that Marx wrote when he was very young, because a lot of people, at least in the West, didn't know it existed until like the 1930s. It was kind of secreted away, right, in the Soviet Union, and it wasn't until fairly recently that people discovered it. Well, anyway, it's more approachable generally. So this is what it's about. It's more materialism. The other reading that we had was very much about materialism. Again, remember that is as opposed to idealism, right? So for Hegel, it's idealism, right? For Aristotle, it's idealism. It's all about the ideas, the perfect, right? You envision the perfect thing. You are influenced by, for Hegel, the spirit, or God or whatever. Marx isn't interested in that, as I said, he turns Hegel on his head, and he's interested in the material, right? If we're going to theorize, let's theorize from the actual material world, right? Again, you could see where like even the state of nature, theorists who talk about the state of nature, that's idealism. They're talking about some ideal, fantastic world, right? Like a fantasy world. Marx isn't interested. Okay, so what we're going to talk about, in the last Marx lecture, I talked about dialectical materialism. Here I'll talk a little bit about historical materialism. And then in class, we're going to watch a brief video, an animation, RSA animates, of a guy actually doing historical materialism. So like, how do we look at these big trends through time and chart them, and how the material conditions of the world and how they affect things. Okay, so this image in the background here, this is, again, important for the theory, the Marx theory, this idea of base and superstructure. So as you see here, right, the base is the material stuff, right? It's the people, it's the workers, it's tools, it's the material of the world. Then there's the superstructure, which is this is where the idealism is, right? So for Hegel, you start with the superstructure and then you go to the base. For Marx says, no, you start with the base and you go to the superstructure, but it goes both ways, right? So law, medicine, this is all ideology. So the idea here is that one influences the other and the other influences the first, right? That the material conditions in which we live influences how we think, right? What we consider culture, art, how we think of the family, how we philosophize, how we do politics, all of that stuff. And then that stuff influences the material world, right? And we can think up examples and talk about examples of this in class. And there's many, right, that make it a little bit more concrete. But effectively, right, that's the relationship, right? How we live influences our ideas, and the ideas then affect how we live. Okay. So quickly, we have, talked about dialectical materialism. Let me move my little... trying this different location here. I'll move myself down here to the, should I be in the base or should I put myself in the superstructure? I'll put myself up in the superstructure. Okay. So dialectical materialism we talked about, right? This is that interaction, right? On a small scale. Historical materialism is taking this concept and then expanding it over history, right? So this idea of the base and superstructure interacting can occur in any one historical moment, right? But once you chart the evolution of that relationship through history, then you've moved from dialectical materialism to historical materialism. This is often, right, this is where the Hegel comes in, the opposites, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That's dialectics, right? Okay, so that's just what I said, right? That historical materialism is dialectical materialism on a historical scale. So again, for Hegel, dialectics, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Marx, right, extends it to dialectical materialism. It's about the material stuff, and now we've moved into historical materialism. Let's look at this stuff through the long, right, view of history. And this is that famous Marx quote, right? The history of all hitherto existing human society is the history of class struggle. That's historical materialism, right? That the idea that Marx looks at history and says, what is the prime mover of history? How does history evolve? How does the superstructure and the base interact through time? It's all about class struggle, right? The Gracchi brothers would agree, right? Pachacuti for the Incans, right? Plenty of people would agree with this. Okay, so then lastly, this is a concept I've talked about already. This is our reading is all about this. The idea that we are homo faber, that we are working humans, right? That what makes us human. Marx talks about consciousness, obviously, but he's also talking about the material world, like how we work, how we live. This is what we're talking about here, right? That our consciousness is affected by how we work, what we do, what kind of tools we use, and then, right, the tools we use, how we work, how we live affects our consciousness. This is actually, I don't remember if you remember from patterns or whatever, but certainly when I taught patterns for the ancient history stuff, it is true that if you look at the evolution of like the human hand, as humans get better with creating tools, right, the hand evolves, and as the hand evolves, you make better tools, and as the tools evolve, you get more dexterity in your hands, and right, so that is that example of kind of homo faber, that what makes us, right, human is that we want to work, we like working, and it influences who we are. It helps our species being, right? That we want to fulfill our species being. Again, this is when I talked about alienation, that under capitalism, Marx says that we are alienated, right? We are alienated from the mode of production, the product, the thing we make, from our fellow human beings, and then ultimately from our species essence, right? Our Gattungswesen. So this isn't cool, says Marx, that we should be able to do what we want. We should be able to do what fulfills us, what makes us happy. And then what everything else we do should be up to us. We should have more time to kind of, again, fulfill our species being. We'll talk more about this in class, very brief overview of the reading. And then as I said, we'll watch a clip of someone actually doing a kind of historical materialist reading of global events. Chief among those, let's see if we have it here in my slides, the global kind of debt crisis of 2007, 2009, and how that, again, how a Marxist geographer and historian would interpret that economic crisis through the lens of historical materialism. Again, this is all about application. So unlike Kant or Hegel, Marx wants it, right? You want to apply the philosophy to the real world and interpret the philosophy in the real world. So we'll do that in class.